From the #1 best-selling author of Life Rescripted, you're now tuning in to the Year of Purpose podcast. I'm Zephan Moses Blacksburg. Today we have Sharie Spironhi, and she is a renowned motivational speaker, educator, counselor, and author of Why We Are Wired to Worry and How Neuroscience Will Help You Fix It. She is an undisputed expert in human behavioral science who has dedicated her life to helping people get off their worry-go-round. Inspired by her overnight defeat of bipolar disorder, Sharie is a living example of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change and heal. And she just has an absolutely amazing story, so I don't want to tell the whole story in the intro here. So Sharie, I just want to bring you in and say thank you so much for being here today. And I'm excited to jump into this because, as a few people know who follow the podcast, I was actually diagnosed with bipolar when I was in my teenage years. So thank you so much for being here today, and thank you for the story you're about to share with us.
Oh, Zephan, thank you so much for having me on. I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah, so, when I was 13, I was diagnosed with bipolar, and it's quite debilitating for what it is. So I'd love for you just to share a little bit of your past and how that came about, and then we'll fast forward and talk about this idea of the brain being able to heal and change itself and rewire itself.
Sure. Well, I came into the field of psychology, basically in an official way when I was 24. And by the time I was 27, I had already spearheaded a rehabilitation program for drugs and alcohol under the name of David Toma in Mexico. I had written 2 books, and I was the co-producer of the David Toma Show on WOR, which was a nationally syndicated TV show. For those of you out there old enough to remember, he was the subject of the TV show Beretta. So I had done quite a bit, but Zephan, everybody was very impressed with everything I had accomplished, but I was trying very hard to hide something that no one knew about, and that was very severe mood swings. Now, for those of you out there that understand anything about bipolar or manic depression, what it's sometimes called, you can have tremendous amounts of energy and go for days, sometimes without sleep, and then you kind of crash and you're in bed for weeks. So when I was high functioning, I was a force to be reckoned with. I was unstoppable. I mean, I was in my 20s and I was doing some pretty cool stuff, and it was relatively easy, except when all of a sudden I would crash and feel like the world was one of the darkest places you could imagine. So when I had come back from Mexico, I had my mood swings were all over the place, and people had suggested go see a therapist. And I had already seen a therapist several times from the time I was 20 on. I knew something was up. Nobody was pinpointing it. So I decided to go see someone, and after 3 visits, he said, "It's easy to see what's going on with you." He said, "You're a manic depressive." And in one sentence, Zephan, I went from, being a co-producer of a TV show and being on top of the world to being thrown to the other side of the desk, and now I'm the person who needs help. And to say it was devastating would be an understatement. I looked at him and said, "You're crazy," and I walked out. And for the next few weeks, I really tried to just reel myself in and control everything. Extreme mood swings were not foreign to me, because what we came to find out was that I was dealing with manic depressive as a child. Nobody knew that back then. Now, I'm in my early 50s. Back then, they weren't diagnosing such things. When I was in grammar school, I would tell people that when I go to sleep at night, my brain feels like it explodes and has millions of ideas. I would be up till all hours of the night writing poetry and cleaning the bathroom and, weird stuff. But, no one ever said they understood what I was going through, but no one ever said it was weird. So other than the fact I was not ADD or anything like that, so I could sit still, but I would talk a mile a minute. So, that drove teachers crazy. But Zephan, other than that, there were no flags, so nobody caught this. So here I am, an adult, going, whoa, 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 I've been like this my whole life. You have to be wrong. Well, it was very rare to diagnose a child with manic depression, or even in hindsight, to be able to look back. This was in the very early 90s, to be able to look back and say, oh, wow, you are manic depressive. So I was like, grappling with, wait a minute, this is who I've always been. What are you talking about? I didn't just develop this, but I knew it had gotten very extreme. And, I had run the gamut of, the severe mood swings. I remember in fifth grade walking along the street and feeling like there was a party going on in my brain and thinking, my God, why can't I make this, happen all the time? I feel so confident. I feel so special. I knew something was up. And then, of course, that, took me into eventually drugs and alcohol, trying to self-medicate. Then I became very suicidal, very depressed. I was in 10 car accidents in a year. I was really a wild child. And than all that, I did wind up going to rehab at 18 years old. And when I was in rehab, they're just like, well, everything's, you're crazy because you're on drugs. Well, okay, I stopped drugs and I thought the rest was history. So now to be diagnosed with this illness, I'm like, whoa. I was in a rehab for a whole, 6 weeks. I was in a psych ward. Nobody said anything about this. How'd this happen? So this was really shocking. So I finally said, I gave in and said, all right, I'm going to try medication, because the depression that I was dealing with was really brutal. And I had a lot of issues with wanting to kill myself. I mean, who wants to live in that state? To me, that was, pretty normal. But I finally agreed to try the medication. And usually, as you know, Zephon, that's half the battle. Get them on meds and the rest will kind of, follow suit. But that wasn't what happened. The medicine didn't work. And for the next 6 years, I was in and out of hospitals, sometimes 2 months at a time, 6 weeks at a time, always for wanting to kill myself, which again made the most sense. They would dope me up with so many drugs. I couldn't even, make out a food list. I was so unproductive. I would sleep all day. I went from the pinnacle of was a great career to being an invalid. Emotionally, I was a mess. And I can remember back then looking at people in wheelchairs. And I used to think how lucky they were. And please understand me, I'm not minimizing their pain at all. But I used to think they have their brain. They're not betrayed by their own mind. I could have taken living without legs. I could have handled that, but to live without your mind, to have your own mind betray you, is so brutal. Unless you experience it, you really don't understand it. To want to be so happy and nothing you do is working. Well, what they came to find out was the reason medication was not really working on me was because they realized I was a rapid cycling manic depressive with mixed states, which for those of you who don't know, basically means you can be hyper and manic and depressed at the same time. This is a real special kind of hell that, you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy.
And well, this is something that it really hits home and is all too familiar to me as well. And I don't think this is the first time that I've mentioned that, I've gone through an interesting scenario as well in a very similar way. But, at 13, for the listeners tuning in, I was diagnosed as well in a very similar fashion. I know what you mean when you talk about the thoughts racing a mile a minute. I actually used to never be able to fall asleep. I would stay up all night because different ideas would just come to me.
Yeah.
And so I totally get what that's like. And I know what you mean when you say, seeing others who had certain, shortcomings or disabilities and thinking, wow, they're the lucky ones because they can still think for themselves. So I know exactly what you mean there. And so I'm really kind of excited is the wrong word for this, but I'm really interested and curious to talk more about this because I think that it's something that most people don't bring up. And one of the biggest things that I try to stress here on the Year of Purpose podcast is that, it's really about bettering yourself and improving yourself and finding ways to really get yourself both in your mind and mentally, but also physically, emotionally, with your relationships and your business or in your career, running 110%. And so maybe let's jump forward because I know you told me or you shared with me a little bit about how overcoming this happened in a unique way. And, I actually had a very similar story in that it really almost seemed like it was something that can happen overnight. So I'd love to hear, let's jump forward to where that happened, and maybe we can talk through how other people might be able to create that type of a transformation as well.
Absolutely. Well, after 6 years of this, I had pretty much resolved myself the fact that I'd be in and out of hospitals the rest of my life or until I killed myself. I had what I say, virtually lost all hope. And I wound up, hope this doesn't offend people. I can't help for how it happened, but I was at a church and a little old lady in her 80s asked if she could pray for me. She happened to be there speaking, and I thought, all right, knock yourself out. She didn't know anything that was going on with me. And she prayed for me for 2 hours. Now, my next book will be coming out, and I promise I go into all the details. But suffice it to say, she prayed for me for 2 hours, and then consecutively for 3 more nights. It was 4 nights, 2 hours each night that she was speaking there. And there were hundreds of people there, but she just kept coming to me and no one else. So the first night when I went home, I drove home around midnight, and I felt like I was in a trance. It was bizarre. And when I got in my house, it felt like sunshine burst into my brain. I cannot explain it any other way. And I'm looking around my house, and I know the lights are on, but it didn't look like lights. It looked like sunshine was illuminating my house, and it's midnight. And I'm a realist. I don't get crazy about things. I'm like, okay, I don't know what this is. The mind's very powerful. I'm just going to go to sleep and try to see what this is, see how I feel in the morning. And it was different. I mean, I felt different. I felt bright, and something dark I felt like had left me. So I did something that I don't recommend to people out there, but I came off all my medication in about 25 days. And I was on over 20 different pills throughout the day. I was on, elephant size amounts of drugs because they could not regulate me. When I went back to my doctor about 6 weeks later and told him what happened, he looked at me and he said, you know what? He says, what you're telling me is that you cut off your finger and you're trying to tell me God grew you a new one. And he said, he doesn't do that anymore. And it made what happened to me seem even more mind-blowing and more powerful. And I just got up and said, listen, I promise I'll call you if anything changed. And nothing ever did. I was normal for the first time in my life. And what people don't understand, when you see people on TV and they suddenly jumping up and down on a stage and they say they're healed, believe me, it's not like that. When you've lived with something so horrible your whole life, you are so in awe and so in shock. You don't even know what to make of it. I mean, you're treading lightly. You're not running around telling anybody anything except that, wow, something's going on with me and I don't know what it is. And then time eventually begins to reveal that this is permanent, and I'm not crazy anymore. I have no more mood swings. I can sit and think and be still. I can be quiet for hours. What happened? And I'm on no medication. And that was, bizarre. And, the only thing that validates it is that, that was 20 years ago. It was 1996. So we're looking at 20 years ago, and it's never come back. And, people say to me, did you have faith, that night that you asked for somebody to pray for you or walked up? And I said, no. First I used to say no, Zephron, but the truth is, faith is what you don't know. Mm-hmm. Trust is what you can believe in because it's been proven to you. But faith is what you really don't know, but you go for it anyway. And many people out there are getting up every single day because of faith. And you don't know it and you don't realize it, but I'm telling you, that's what's in you. That's what's getting you up every day saying, something's got to change. Something has to be different. What we came to find out, this was in 1996, and what we came to find out, later on was that in 1996, neuroscientists had coined the phrase neuroplasticity. Now, what happened in my brain? What changed? They used to think that your brain was the way it was, the way you were born. You had a certain set of neurons. They didn't, if they died off, you didn't get new ones. Everything was static in the brain. They now know that could not be further from the truth. This is why someone can lose their eyesight and develop hearing that is superhuman, because that part of the brain that used to be used for eyesight is joining forces with the auditory system because it wants something to do, and it doubles the power of the hearing. This is when people can go into a coma and come out and suddenly play the piano. Your brain can do all kinds of amazing things. Now, technology now knows this is possible. We don't know quite how to control it. We do know that genes are expressed at different times in different ways, that we have much more, not control, but much more influence over them than we ever knew that we did. And for both of us, Efren, something changed. Now, this is also referred to as spontaneous remission. And this happens to people every single day, from cancer to diabetes to mental illness. This is a regular thing. It does happen. Technology, unfortunately, is not quite there to be able to give us the science as to how to control this and make it happen. But I am telling you, it can. And this is one of the reasons that really motivated me to write my book.
And so let me hit the timeout button for like half a second just to even back up what you're saying here too. In my experience, only because while we have a very similar experience, just for anyone who, everyone comes from all walks of life and different backgrounds, and some have deeper religious beliefs than others. And so I had a very interesting part of this too, where I kind of woke up one day and basically said, either I'm going to take my own life, or I've got to do something that's going to stop this. I never had any experience that involved faith in this, but I chose, just like you did, to stop my medicine. I made the poor choice of stopping cold turkey, which, just as you recommended, I don't recommend to anyone to do. Obviously talk to your doctors first, but I think that it's so interesting to hear that, you stopped your medicine, and I had just an ounce of clarity to know to stop my medicine too. And almost like that, overnight, things changed, and for the better. I mean, I went through withdrawal for about 3 to 5 days, maybe a week or so. But after that week, I mean, it literally was like a switch had been flipped and things started to turn on again inside my brain and started to work. So just to provide some, extra, to your story and let everyone know who's tuning in, this idea of neuroplasticity and that our brains can rewire themselves, it's very real. And for some people, they don't experience it through faith and through religion. For some people, they do. And so it's so interesting just to hear you talk about this, because I went through a very similar process in that, you kind of wake up one day and things just start turning on again. The lights start lighting up again. And so it's so interesting to hear you say that. Let's dive into this idea of how the brain can rewire itself. I mean, because on the outside, it seems like it's this magical, someone waved a wand and I just woke up okay the next day.
Right.
What's actually happening inside when we make these changes?
Well, there's changes that can happen because different genes decide to express themselves. They're always on. They used to think they're either on or off. They're not. They're always on, but they begin to express themselves. There's things that it has to do with, maybe certain proteins have to be available. They know that. And then there's things where things just begin to change in the brain itself. It just begins this neural patterning that becomes different. You can change. Let me give you an example. If you decide to buy a Toyota today, you go out and start driving on the roads, Efron, you're going to start seeing Toyotas everywhere. Just a little circuitry and a little focus of your mind, giving yourself a little bit of guidance, turns on something called the reticular activating system. And your brain, like a laser focus, begins to search and seek out Toyotas all the time, everywhere. And it's not by your conscious mind, it's by your subconscious mind. We're talking about very powerful stuff here. And also, so people understand, when I use the word faith, I know that so often coincides with religion, but I don't mean it with that. I mean, faith is just something you believe in the most minute way, but you don't have validation for it. And that can be for anything. And, for you just, Eckhart Tolle went through something also very similar. He was ready for a nervous breakdown. He was a mess. If you ever hear Eckhart Tolle's story, very powerful man who teaches about mindfulness and all. He's a huge guru these days. I mean, he's probably one of the biggest sought out speakers and authors on the earth right now. And he just woke up one day and everything was different. And he realized he had to start taking in each moment as it is. And he saw things from a totally different perspective change. And when you see things differently, new neurons come online. And although your brain sometimes can feel like, there's patterns and habits, takes, 21 days to build one and 21 days to break one down. But your brain, that's really because for them to manifest, it takes about 21 days. But the second you determine that you want something different, your brain will do everything in its power to join forces with you and make that possible. And most of that takes place in your perspective. You change your perspective, you change everything. It's believing. It's like when, someone broke the 4-minute mile, which no one had done for many years, forever. Everyone started breaking the 4-minute mile because the limitations are suddenly understood that they can be broken. And when people hear stories like this, or why people go to conferences, is because they become inspired by the testimonies of other people and they realize so much more is possible. And that's really just step one. You educate yourself with everything you can. Every time you get educated, you understand more about your brain. You understand more about how it operates and how it works. You become and you grow closer to becoming the person you want to be because you're able to influence your own mind and how it works. What fires together wires together. So you start doing things slightly differently and your brain wires itself accordingly. Now, one of the things that I teach in the book is about becoming a happier person, and that this isn't platitudes. Now, there's a lot of teaching that goes on in this, but let me just give you a quick story as to how this all came about for me.
Sure.
I was in a very anxious place a few years, going back about 4 or 5 years, and I had just feeling anxious by the most minute, mundane thought, like I have to get the mail, and I call it squirts because it's like squirts of cortisol because I'm obsessed with neurotransmitters and that's all I ever focus on. And I literally could feel it squirting for every thought. Now, I refer to this as a loop, which means basically my brain is getting stuck and my brain starts to interpret that every thought, it just needs to do this because what fires together wires together. Okay, I know I needed to break this. I didn't know how yet, but I went on vacation down the shore and I'm at the beach and I'm listening to an audiobook. And the audiobook was about art and it was very inspiring. And I was doing art at the time. I'm a painter. And all of a sudden I have an epiphany that my best artwork is ahead of me. Now, that was a big epiphany for me because at the time, for whatever reason, I did not know I believed this, but I had subconsciously adopted the thought and the belief that my artwork already, my best stuff had happened and I would be going downhill. I never consciously made that decision. So step one to making changes is learning to understand what you believe in. You've got to know these things in order to dismantle them. So all of a sudden I have this epiphany. I'm like, oh my God, I feel like I'm on top of the world. Great, amazing feeling. I go back up to the house and once again, the littlest thought, I'm feeling the anxiety. I stopped in my tracks and I went back to the memory of my best artwork is ahead of me. And instantly I released neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin, and the anxiety stopped immediately. And I thought, oh, that was cool. Well, this was happening every few moments. So next minute I felt that anxiety and went, oh, my best artwork is ahead of me. And it vanished. I kept doing this. And in 3 hours, something miraculous happened. When my brain would release the cortisol like it was doing, these little squirts, before I thought the thought, oh, my best artwork's ahead of me, my brain released the serotonin for me and the dopamine. It released my happy chemicals automatically. This happened in 3 hours because what fires together wires together. Your brain's very efficient, so it quickly learned, wait a minute, when she feels that anxiety, release the good chemicals. I didn't have to think the thought anymore. And I stopped dead in my tracks and went, what the heck did I just stumble onto? It was a year later that I read a great book by Rick Hansen, who's a great neuroscientist, about the science behind this and the understanding. And it became eventually part of my book, Why We Are Wired to Worry. And I actually talk about this. This is one of the steps in the book to how to implement these positive experiences to offset the negative. And eventually your brain lines up and goes, okay, just start looking for the positive because you're wired to only seek out the negative. And people don't understand this. We probably don't have time for me to go into it, but our brains love the negative. It thinks that that's what's going to keep you alive. It doesn't give a hoot about whether or not you're happy because it figures if you're alive, you will be. It's very old programming that we have to overcome. And you can do this in about 3 weeks. And you can change everything. And it's, again, going back to your perspective. And I mean, I get emails every day from people who were seriously depressed on medication. They've been in and out of therapy, and they say that this book has changed their life. And it's simply because they put it into practice and their brain followed suit. Any brain is malleable. You can change your own brain.
Yeah, I mean, it's truly remarkable to see what the brain is capable of. And, I think the problem is that we live in a time where we still don't know everything about it yet, despite all of the advances in technology and all the things that we do have and that we are capable of. It's just one of those things that is going to take so much longer for us to fully understand. But, I mean, you've got to admit, it's pretty great that we know it's possible now. We kind of have the starting point of where we can go from there. And I bet this talk could go on and on about the negativity and how we search for negativity, and I know exactly what that's like, especially having suffered panic attacks myself. Let's just jump into, though, people probably are looking for answers right now, right? Like anyone who's tuning in who wants to do this themselves is probably like, okay, tell me what I need to do. Where do I go next? And so one of the big ones is you've got this book. It's called Why We Are Wired to Worry and How Neuroscience Will Help You Fix It. And this is one of the great places for people to get a lot of answers on how they can do this themselves. What other means or methods do you have, for people to work with you and to understand what their brain is capable of and ultimately rewire it so that they can overcome certain things, whether it's, thinking negatively or, dealing with depression or anxiety or even just a lack of happiness?
Well, it all comes down to the first step, which is understanding our brain. Zephron, we know more about our smartphone than we do about our brain, and that has to change. Now, one of the things I did in my book was there's a workbook in the book. You go through the book, you're reading, and then there's workbooks. And it's not a silly workbook like, what I say on page 22.
Mm-hmm.
It's about you and your brain. So you begin to understand the beliefs you have in place so that you can disrupt that whole system, because it's the beliefs that hold us back. Because when you have a belief, believe me, your brain will not allow you to see anything that's contrary to it. Now, as a therapist, one of the things I do is EMDR work with people, where we take core beliefs and in an hour you can eradicate them. This is a much, much more efficient therapy than the traditional talk therapy. We've gone way beyond that now. It's been around for 20 years, EMDR, but it is a fantastic way for you to break through your beliefs, because that's really a great place to start. So find a therapist in your area who does EMDR therapy. That's eye desensitization reprocessing. Okay, that's this. I know it's a really long word, but it's about being able to enter into a state of mind like you're in when you're in REM sleep,
Mm-hmm.
while you're awake. And it allows you to dismantle things that have been a part of your belief system your whole life. And you can do it in an hour with an effective therapist. And I do this every day. I work with people, and things that have held them back forever are just completely eradicated. It's amazing work. But again, it comes down to knowing what you believe and then tearing those false beliefs down so that you can start to reorchestrate the proper way to think and simply implement positive ways to think. It's not hard. Like, again, in the workbook, I break this down to the most simple steps that in 3 weeks you're different. I mean, 3 weeks is all it takes. And we're only talking about 15 minutes a day. There's steps involved. You have to know why you got here. You have to know how your brain works. And please don't let the terminology neuroscience freak you out. It's just science, okay? But I broke it down into layman terms so that anyone can read this book and get it and understand. There are things in this book that no book has ever done. Like, I break down the 3 chemicals, dopamine, oxytocin, and serotonin, and I break them down with all the different events in your life that will trigger their release and also diminish them, so that you begin to understand when you're feeling yucky, why you're feeling yucky. There's nothing worse than losing your sense of purpose during the day because your serotonin will drop off immediately, leaving you feel like crap. Well, now you'll know, wait a minute, I'm floundering. It's because how do I get that back? And I've got these all kinds of little techniques that you can implement and boost it right back up. So, it's not, there is a lot to know, but it's in layman terms. And gosh, in 3 weeks, if you want to be different, I'm telling you, get this book and find a good EMDR therapist. And I'll tell you, in a couple of months, you won't recognize yourself.
That's absolutely amazing. So, Sharie, what's the best place to find your book so that they can also get that workbook that comes along with it and really get started on working through that if they find that, if anyone tuning in right now has gone through some of these things we've discussed today?
Oh, simply just go to Amazon. You can just put in Wire to Worry. My book will come right up. And you can get it even as an Audible book because I know people are so busy, and I really wanted to make it easy for people to get the information even while they're riding back and forth to work. So
Mm-hmm.
you can get a Kindle or the audio book if you'd like, and just start the process. You can go to my website, which is shariespironhi.com. Lots of resources, lots of podcasts. Much of what I teach in the book you can just get from my podcast. They're all for free. So help yourself and don't lose that faith that says tomorrow just might be better, because it can be.
Perfect. Well, I don't think we could wrap this up in any better way. Sharie, thank you so much for being here today, and it's really been great speaking with you.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really a pleasure.
Hey everyone, it's Zeph. Did you like this episode? Be sure to subscribe so that you can tune in next week and tell a friend about the show. If you want access to free training and exclusive interviews on success, happiness, lifestyle design, and adventure, visit me at yearofpurpose.com. Until next time, go out and let life surprise you so that you can live a life rescripted.